the South Asian Federation of Accountants International Relations Committee, together with CMA Sri Lanka, are pleased to welcome you to the webinar SAFA Regional Focus Group for the revision of the International IR Framework conducted by the International Integrated Reporting Council, hosted by the SAFA International Relations Committee, together with the Institute of Certified Management Accountants of Sri Lanka, that is CMA Sri Lanka. The SAFA International Relations Committee has members from all member bodies of SAFA and is chaired by Professor Lakshman R. Vatawala. SAFA has signed an MOU with International Integrated Reporting Council, and this is a joint seminar of SAFA and IIRC. As all of you might already be quite aware that IIRC, on the completion of its first 10 years, has undertaken the first ever revision of the International IR Framework with a wide objective of ensuring that integrated reporting continues to meet the wider goals of financial stability and sustainable development. The draft of the revised framework is currently open for 90 days of public consultation that would end in the next few days. The proud host of today's program, CMA Sri Lanka, cannot be any more prouder to assist the SAFA International Relations Committee and IIRC in getting the feedback from all of you present at this webinar today, as it is your feedback that would result in a refreshed IR framework that would be of immense use for all users of integrated reports. We congratulate and thank all participants from the South Asian region for the interest shown towards the development of integrated reporting, although we are overcoming the periods of COVID-19 pandemic and now in the new economy. Though we wish to meet and greet all of you in person, we are left with no option than a virtual meeting in consideration of the benefit and safety of all. There would not be a better opening for an event of this caliber than hearing a few words of warm welcome from our very own Professor Lakshman R. Vatawala, current chairman of the SAFA International Relations Committee and president of CMA Sri Lanka. Professor Vatawala is a signatory to the formation of SAFA in 1984, the first vice president and the second president of SAFA, the past president of CA Sri Lanka, and a proud receiver of the National Honours Sri Lanka Sikh Harmony, installed in Hall of Fame of CSL, and Award Lifetime Achievement Award by CMA Sri Lanka. A fatherly figure in the accounting profession with more than 4 decades of service to the profession, and was instrumental in founding 2 professional accounting bodies in Sri Lanka: the Association of Accounting Technicians of Sri Lanka, commonly known as AAT, and the Institute of Certified Management Accountants of Sri Lanka, that is CMA Sri Lanka. He is a former chairman of the Board of Investment Sri Lanka and People's Bank, and currently the deputy chairman of Destetna Ceylon PLC, a director of the Lake House Printers and Publishers PLC and Lanka IOC PLC. Professor Lakshman R. Vatawala, I am honored to invite you to deliver the opening remarks and the welcome address.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good evening, and I don't know whether there is any good morning also. If there are any from maybe the America or other areas or in the UK. I'm indeed pleased to, on behalf of the International Relations Committee of SAFA, together with CMA Sri Lanka, very pleased to welcome you to this webinar, SAFA Regional Focus Group for the revision of the International Integrated Reporting Framework. This is one of the first events organized by SAFA with IIRC after signing the MOU with the IIRC. The International Relations Committee has been involved in many international projects connected with the setting up of the professional accounting bodies in Maldives, Afghanistan, and Bhutan. Afghanistan was successful to get themselves incorporated by an act of parliament and are now an associate member of SAFA, while the incorporation of the Maldives body, where we provided the draft act of incorporation, is still pending incorporation, and we do hope that it will happen soon. Bhutan is also taking action to set up the body once the World Bank project is completed. This will enable SAFA to have professional accounting bodies in all its member countries, putting financial management and accountability in the forefront of economic development. Today, I am indeed happy that the president of SAFA, Mr. Ziaul Mustafa is present with us to deliver the keynote address. He is also the president of the Institute of Cost and Management Accountants of Pakistan and actively involved in making the accounting profession dynamic and forward-looking. The president of IFAC was unable to attend due to IFAC board meeting also taking place at the same time, and he has sent his best wishes, and IFAC will be represented by Ms. Laura Leka, Senior Technical Manager, PIIB, and Integrated Reporting of the International Federation of Accountants. I must also welcome the panel from IIRC, Ms. Liz Prescott, the Technical Director of IIRC. We have been working very closely with her. Liz, thank you very much. And we are indeed pleased to welcome you to the second seminar that you've been having with us. Associate Professor Lakshmi Kapera, who is also the Director of the Integrated Reporting Center at the Deakin Business School, and Graham Terry, the IIRC ambassador. So we are very pleased that three eminent persons who are very well versed with the IIRC framework and also the changes they are going to make are here with us today. So we are very happy to have them. In early July, as CMA Sri Lanka had conducted a very successful webinar for the members of CMA Sri Lanka and the Chartered Accountants of Sri Lanka, and this encouraged us to organize this event for all SAFA countries. And I must thank the President of SAFA for encouraging us to conduct this, and also the presence of such a large number of distinguished personalities from the different countries. As you are aware, the first ever revision of the International Integrated Reporting Framework is underway. The conduct of this program by IIRC will ensure integrated reporting continues to meet the wider goals of financial stability and sustainable development, and the revision of the IIRC Integrated Reporting Framework, which we will be discussing today. The three areas to which much attention will be given are on responsibility, business model, and the path forward, which will be handled by our eminent speakers. You may be aware that CMA Sri Lanka organizes the CMA Sri Lanka Excellence in Integrated Reporting Awards 2020. This year, for the 7th time, we feel that with the COVID-19 pandemic, the company shareholders will want to see, stakeholders will want to see how companies will overcome the adverse impacts and implement strategies to create value in the short, medium, and long term. And we feel that having this award ceremony is really a good thing in order that our companies could show their best. The calling for applications will be carried out in a few days, and those who are from Sri Lanka, and even if in the region, if they wish to apply, certainly we would recommend it. I must thank the presidents of SAFA member bodies and SAFA Secretariat for supporting this event and sending their panelists to contribute to the consultation process. The CMA Member Activities Division should also be recognized for the hard work put into in organizing this event. I'm sure that you all will benefit from this seminar, and SAFA will be able to make their valuable comments representing the views of the SAFA professional accounting bodies, adding strength to the South Asian region and to strengthen the integrated reporting framework. Thank you.
That, ladies and gentlemen, was Professor Lakshmanan Vatawala, Chairman of the SAFA International Relations Committee and President of CMA Sri Lanka. Thank you, sir. Next in agenda is the keynote address by the President of the South Asian Federation of Accountants, Ziaul Mustafa. Mr. Mustafa is also a member of the SAFA board and the Assembly. He has served ICMA Pakistan in various capacities and has ample exposure of the functioning of CAPA and IFAC, that is, apart from SAFA. He assumed the responsibility of President of ICMA Pakistan with the distinction of being its youngest president since the inception of the institute. Mr. Ziaul Mustafa has exposure of over 20 years in corporate and public sector organizations, during which period he remained associated in various segments of economy like manufacturing, construction, services, banking, and education. We are honored by your presence with us here today, sir, and the platform is yours for the keynote address.
Thank you, Delai. Good afternoon to all the colleagues. First of all, I would like to congratulate Professor Lakshman Vatawala for taking this timely initiative. In his capacity as the chairman of SAFA International Relations Committee to organize this regional focus group for the revision of the International Integrated Reporting Framework. I am also thankful to providing me the opportunity and inviting me to give the inaugural address to this August gathering. I welcome all the distinguished speakers from the International Integrated Reporting Council, Professor Graham, IIRC Ambassador, and Ms. Liz, Technical Director of IIRC, Mr. Pereira, Director Education, Deakin University, and hope that their presentation would help the participants to clearly understand the nature of revisions made in the IR framework and the way forward. The South Asian Federation of Accountants is a forum of professional accounting bodies, as explained by Mr. Vatawala, who is the second president of this organization. And this is the apex body of the SAARC. SAARC is known as South Asian Association of Regional Corporation. And in this, right now, 8 countries are falling in this SAARC region. And this organization is working in the public interest and towards broader economic development of the region, in part through promoting harmonization of accounting standard and practices. So as Vatawala said, it is formed, established in 1984 with the objective to promote harmonization by building common knowledge. So practically it is itself not involved in developing the standard, but we are giving our support to the International Federation of Accountants and other boards of the IFAC for the harmonization of accountancy and auditing profession. Needless to say that SAFA voice is essential to the revision process because integrated reporting is at its core a market-led movement. I do hope that some useful suggestions and ideas would be put forward today by professional accountants and academia from the SAFA region that will also help IIRC in further improving IR framework. Ladies and gentlemen, the first revision of integrated reporting framework by the IIRC is a timely initiative because of the growing demand for corporate reporting on issues such as United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and climate change, along with stewardship and corporate governance, inclusive of capitalism. This revision would help organizations globally to use IR framework effectively. Integrated reporting is the future of reporting and the accounting profession. Besides enabling the organization to provide a fuller and a better picture of their ability to create value over the long term, it will result in auditors not only 20% of financial data, that is organizational value, but also playing a role in the assurance of 80% non-financial data or intangibles. And now in COVID crisis has also reinforced the fact that integrated reporting is a good communication tool. The crisis will promote more companies to adopt integrated reporting, if only to give them a platform to assure the providers of financial capital that their investment is still viable and the company has a proper strategy and response to deal with this crisis. In an integrated report, careful consideration can show the trade-offs between the capital that are needed for the company to navigate this crisis and how the strategy of the business had to adopt it to remain sustainable and competitive in the market. Similarly, in a sustainability report, the company can demonstrate how it supported employees, contractors, and the society in safeguarding their livelihood. On the other hand, if we look, the traditional financial statement will only show historic financial results, mainly, and poor financial results, we can say, mainly due to the shutdown of economies. But it will not reflect the company's efforts on how it has dealt successfully with the COVID-19 shocks over the short, medium, and long term. So before concluding, let me say a few words on what role should the accountancy professional bodies must play in promoting extensive adoption of integrated reporting by the organizations globally. I think they can play a significant and influential role by taking a few initiatives, such as hosting advocacy campaign with policymakers, with civil society, with media and other organizations, including IR in the integrated reporting in the accountancy qualification framework to empower future accountants, and in the CPD programs. In these initiatives, we can develop IR implementation material and provide implementation support to the organizations. And we can lead by examples by preparing the annual integrated reports. So these are the few initiatives which we can take. Adopting integrated thinking and IR will contribute to improving decision-making, transparency, and accountability, especially to how organizations in the public and private sectors are creating value and contributing towards improving the lives of citizens, ending poverty, and boosting shared prosperity. SAFA is honored to be a part of this initiative by International Integrated Reporting Council to conclude the consolidation of comments and suggestions on the IR framework, and we believe this would be greatly welcomed when launched. So I'm once again would like to thanks to Mr. Wadawala, the chairman of International Relations Committee, and the SAFA board and IIRC for joining forces to organize this event. Wish you good luck. I hope that the learned speaker will share their valuable suggestions and valuable input with all the professional accountants and the other professionals, which will upgrade us and help us in improving these IIRC reporting framework. Thank you very much.
Thanking you for that immense source of experience, sir, and your valued participation. That, ladies and gentlemen, was Mr. Zia Ul Mustafa, President of the South Asian Federation of Accountants. Next, we have the Technical Director of IIRC, Ms. Liz Prescott, to speak on the development of the IR framework and overview of framework revision project. Liz is a senior member of the IIRC's Guidance, Research and Training team focused on delivering the IIRC's technical program. She also serves as Region Lead Australasia, supporting both the Australian and New Zealand markets to raise awareness and encourage adoption of integrated reporting. She began her professional career as a financial auditor, gaining significant experience across a range of industries for both SMEs and multinationals. Ms. Liz Prescott, we are deeply honored of being provided an opportunity to hear from you today. The platform is yours.
Liz, just 1 minute, Liz, before you start, can I request, I think there are 2-3 videos on. Can you kindly unmute your videos, because I think we would like to have all the videos and if you can kindly mute it other than the person speaking. I think Mr. Mohammed Humayun, can you kindly mute so that we can then, okay. Mr. Mohammed, please mute your video. Mohammed Humayun. Mohammed Humayun. Please mute. Yeah, please mute your video. Okay. Okay, Liz, thank you. Right.
Thank you. Could we bring the slides up, please? And if we can do them full screen, I'm going to turn my video off while I'm speaking. If we can just move forward in the slides, please. Yep, that's today's speakers. That just keep moving forward, please. Yep. Okay. As you can see there on the slide, the 4 objectives that we're going to explore today. We'll look at the development of the integrated reporting framework. I'm going to outline the process that we've undergone during this framework revision. We're going to look at the focused engagement feedback that we received to 3 topic papers produced earlier in the year. And then we will also explore the 15 questions that are in the framework revision consultation. Next slide, please. And there you can see just the agenda. So I'm going to cover the framework itself and the overview before we explore topic paper 1. I will then hand over to Lakshmi Cabrera, who will discuss topic paper 2, and Graham will do topic paper 3. Next slide, please. Okay, so today we're meeting on behalf of the IIRC, who are a global coalition of regulators, investors, companies, standard setters, the accounting profession, academia, and NGOs. And we have many, if not all, of those stakeholder groups represented on today's call. Now, together, this coalition shares the view that communication about value creation should be the next step in the evolution of corporate reporting. And the International Integrated Reporting Framework was developed to meet this need and provide a foundation for the future. Next slide, please. Now, the work of the IRC since its inception 10 years ago has been very much market-led, as reflected in the development of the framework. And if we look back over time, a discussion paper was released in September of 2011, signalling the IRC's intention to develop an international integrated reporting framework. The first working draft of the framework was released as a prototype in November 2012. That was followed by a consultation draft in April of 2013, which was followed by a 90-day comment period where the public responded with feedback to help shape the direction of the IR framework. The framework itself was initially published in December of 2013, in line with the IIRC's strategic aim of achieving a meaningful shift towards early adoption of integrated reporting. In 2017, as part of a strategic review to move to broader adoption of the IR framework and recognition of integrated reporting as an accepted reporting norm, it was timely at that point for the IIRC to hear from market participants and learn from their practical experience with integrated reporting. We launched a formal consultation in March of 2017, which attracted more than 400 submissions and contribution, including feedback from events such as today's in 19 countries around the world. This provided the most up-to-date guide to global implementation of integrated reporting, its successes and challenges from those directly involved in its implementation. The extensive feedback we received indicated that the framework stood up well to the challenges of implementation, but also pointed to opportunities to provide guidance and examples and take other actions to help report preparers and other stakeholders. Now, many of these have been addressed in 2018 and 2019 by the IIRC's technical program. But if we fast forward to today, and the conceptual thinking and principles on which the IR framework were founded are still as relevant as when the IIRC was formed. However, and as determined by the IIRC Council at their November 2019 meeting, insights stemming from practical use and wider market developments, as well as the simple passage of time, warrant a refresh of the framework. So the first ever revision, albeit light touch, was launched in February this year, with the revised framework due to be finalised at the end of this year. Next slide, please. And here we see the framework revision timeline. So the project was formally launched in February before we quickly moved into a focused engagement effort. 3 topic papers were released for comment for 30 days, and accordingly, we consciously designed these 3 papers to be short and digestible, each with just 4 or 5 pages of substance. The number of survey questions was capped to 5 per paper with a simple agree, disagree, please explain format. The feedback received has helped to shape the direction of a consultation draft, which we launched on the 21st of May for a 90-day public exposure period that runs through to next week, Wednesday, the 19th of August. The IIRC technical team, of which I am a part, in conjunction with the IR framework panel, will then analyse the feedback, adjust the framework as needed, and develop a basis for conclusions document. And that will keep us busy from August through to October. The final stage, as you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, includes November approval of a revised framework by the IIRC Board and Council in time for the finalised framework to be launched at the end of the year. Now, I want to stress that all changes to the IR framework that are contemplated in 2020 are of the low-key variety. We are not talking about a wholesale revision to the framework, so there will be no changes to the content elements or guiding principles, but rather we seek to clarify some issues, correct any minor errors, and update the framework to meet our latest branding guidelines. Next slide, please. Now, I mentioned the second phase of the revision project was a focused engagement over a 30-day period, and you can see the 3 topic papers here. The first 2 topic papers, which address the responsibility for an integrated report, and secondly, business model considerations, relate to the current IR framework revision process. The third topic paper explored themes shaping the future of corporate reporting, including assurance and the role of technology. Feedback received to topic paper 3 will largely inform the IIRC's longer-term strategy. One question included in topic paper 3, which covered the purpose of an integrated report, has been included in the current consultation. Now, although this issue lies outside the scope of the current framework revision, both the strength and the quality of arguments received from the focused engagement warrant further market feedback on this issue. And Graham will revisit this point later in his presentation. Next slide, please. You see here an overview of the feedback to the 3 topic papers. We received 101 responses for topic paper 1, 104 for topic paper 2, and 90 for topic paper 3. You can see here on the slide the breakdown of responses received by stakeholder group. And as you can see, consultants, report preparers, professional bodies, and academias were the most prolific of the stakeholder groups to respond, with investors the most underrepresented. And during the 90-day consultation period that we're currently in, the IIRC has been making a concerted effort to ensure that investors are well represented with their feedback during the 90-day consultation. Now, just from a geographic perspective, European responses featured most heavily across all 3 papers, but very pleasingly, all geographic regions were represented. Next slide, please. The feedback from the 3 topic papers was taken into consideration as the consultation draft for a revised IR framework was developed. And during the course of its work, the IR framework panel, working with the IIRC's technical team, balanced multiple considerations, including the remit and objectives of the framework panel as per its terms of reference, the IIRC's vision and mission, the goals of the framework revision project as communicated to the market, the need to uphold the IR framework's principles-based approach, market views as received during the 30-day focused engagement period, as well as our observed practice in integrated reporting. The framework panel was also mindful that certain clarifications may be better placed outside the IR framework in the form of supplementary implementation guidance. In April of 2020, the Framework Panel consulted the IRC Board and Council on its recommendations, and in May, the IRC Board approved the consultation draft and launch of the 90-day consultation period. Next slide, please. You can see here on the screen the consultation materials themselves, and they are presented in two documents. Firstly, the consultation draft on the left, which lists the consultation questions for the framework revision on the opening pages of the document, followed by a marked up version of all changes proposed in the framework. The second document is a companion document to the consultation draft, and it's broken into three parts. The first part captures the Framework Panel's recommendations and the detailed proposals, so it's before and after comparison of the changes. Part 2 details the basis for conclusion, which provides the rationale for each class of change. Part 3 of the companion document contains the summarised feedback from our focused engagement on topic papers 1 to 3. And for those interested, the raw data and the detailed comments received from the focused engagement is available on the IRC website for those who are interested. Next slide, please. The consultation itself is structured along 3 lines. Firstly, testing the IR framework revisions in relation to topic papers 1 and 2. Looking at the issues that will factor in the IRC's future, which was covered by topic paper 3, as well as a call for open feedback. And I've mentioned the 90-day period. It actually closes next Wednesday, the 19th of August. Responses to the consultation draft are to be submitted via an online survey available at the address shown on your screen. But I will ask that a copy of the slides be sent to all participants today, so you will have record of that web address. But please, can I encourage you to provide a submission to the framework revision. The next slide just gives an overview of the various questions included in the consultation draft. Next slide, please. As I said, there are 15 questions. The first couple are related to topic paper 1 and are to do with statement of responsibility. Questions 6 through 10 relate to business model considerations, and then questions 11 through to 15 relate to those issues covered in topic paper 3, with a final call at question 15 for open feedback on any matter not already covered. Now, I might just pause there before we start discussion on topic paper 1. And I did see a chat comment flash up on the screen. If you just give me a moment. Okay, this is from Umair Khan from ICAP in Pakistan. Do the IRC have planned review cycles with a fixed time period for review and approval? Well, as we've said, this is the first ever revision of the IR framework. And no, we won't be planning on reviewing the framework every couple of years. I would suggest that the next phase might be a lighter touch implementation review once the framework has been released. I think the framework itself will be definitely revised in the future. For example, the issue about purpose of the integrated report is receiving very strong arguments both for and against the change that was proposed in topic paper 3. As I said, this matter won't be included in the current revision, but as part of my role, when it comes to the analysis of our consultation responses, I will be recording all matters that have been raised that warrant review for a future revision of the framework. In terms of the actual timing of the next revision, that has not been set yet. And I think what we would expect is that the revised framework would be released and we see how reporting practices actually change in line with the new framework before another potential revision is considered. And then we've had another comment from Manish Upreti from ICANN. How was the response of the investor community over the proposed framework? We have had investors represented in various of these regional focus groups. So we have had responses in a similar format to today's meeting. I have also spoken to various investor focus groups such as PRI, SASB, Eumedion in the Netherlands, and we do expect that we will be receiving organisational responses from those investors. And we also have a question, how far we have engaged stakeholders in South Asia region, where the involvement of key stakeholders may be important for understanding and successful implementation as opposed to developed markets. Well, during this series of regional focus groups, we have had sessions for both Malaysia and another session in Hong Kong. At one stage, the IIRC did have a staff member on the ground in Singapore. It was a couple of years ago now, but he still maintains contact with key markets in the South Asian region. So there is a lot of work going on the ground in the various countries in the Asian region. Another thing that the IIRC will be contemplating in the near future is a conference based in this part of the world. We had great plans for a conference this year, but obviously COVID-19 put an end to that initial planning. But we certainly, provided travel restrictions are lifted in the coming year, I would certainly hope that the IRC would be facilitating a region-specific conference. And we also have efforts underway to set up a special interest group similar to what we have operating around the world at the moment. It's a special interest group on integrated thinking, and that is another topic that we would like to get a similar special interest group up and running in the Asian region. Another question, how NGO sectors are responding on the proposed draft, how far integrated reporting might be useful for NGOs. Integrated reporting, the framework itself has been written largely to apply to larger corporates, but the principles and the content elements could be applied to a business of any size. So we are seeing that a lot of non-government organisations are adopting the framework, so it has been particularly successful for them. And I know in my part of the world, in Australia and New Zealand, the integrated reporting framework and its focus on outputs and outcomes is very much in line with service performance reporting that many of our charities and other NGOs and not-for-profits cover. And another question on, and thank you very much for these questions, keep them coming through. How can the IRC help businesses for its adoption, especially the small and medium-sized business for which the adoption may be viewed as not beneficial? We actually find for some smaller organisations it actually can be easier for them, although they may not have the financial resources of some of the larger organisations. They generally have much smaller teams, so it can be easier to get the whole organisation on board with the implementation of integrated reporting. We have produced a publication with IFAC a couple of years ago on SMEs. And again, that is another area that the IRC is hoping to put more focus on in the coming years. Are the report preparers ready to take responsibility for implementation, especially in the case of South Asian countries? I'm actually going to put that question back to all of the participants. I'd like to get your views. If you can share them with everyone. If you would like to raise your hand and answer, you can. Otherwise, please put your comments in the chat function to everyone on what you see happening in the region. And on that note, I can't see any further questions coming. Oh, there's another one. What are the, okay, I'll take this last question and then we'll move on with the discussion before we break for questions again. What are the key prerequisites for successful implementation of IIRC? I would say the number one prerequisite is support from your senior executives, because integrated reporting to be successful is something that very much needs to be driven by your senior or executive management team. We have seen organisations where perhaps a more middle management level have been very passionate about integrated reporting, but because they haven't had buy-in from the senior leadership team or the board, they've only been able to progress a certain distance along their journey before sort of hitting obstacles because they didn't have that support at the top. So I would say that is the prerequisite to a successful implementation journey, is ensuring that your senior leaders understand what integrated reporting and integrated thinking are all about. I think a lot of people focus on the report itself, but the value in what we're talking about is the thinking that goes on within the company. And to me, the integrated report is simply an outcome of the thinking that's going on within the company. So that's what I would encourage anyone today who's wondering how they get started. It's having those conversations at the senior level so that they understand the benefits of proceeding down this path. I'm going to now go back to the slides and we're going to go through topic paper 1. So if I can just move the slides forward, please, until we, yep, next one, next. There we go. Thank you very much. Okay, so the first topic paper focused on responsibility for an integrated report. Now, section 1G of the framework specifically calls for a statement of responsibility from those charged with governance for 2 reasons. First, it tries to embed a sense of ownership or accountability for the integrated report from those who oversee the business and its strategy. From the reader's standpoint, it instills confidence in the report and enhances the report's credibility. When the IIRC tested this logic back in 2013, when the framework was first being developed, the market generally agreed, citing information integrity and report credibility as their primary reasons. So that's one side of the story, and it's all very positive and very supportive. But fast forward 7 years, and we're now seeing a pronounced gap between what report readers want and what report preparers are willing to provide. We're not seeing many statements of responsibility in practice, and there are several reasons that preparers resist the statement. In the interest of time, I'll just mention the first 3 that you see here, and they are namely conflict with local regulations, director liability concerns, and also confusion over the term collective mind and what it actually means. There are 4 other frequently raised concerns as shown on the slide, but this was enough for us to retest our earlier understanding of market sentiment as it relates to section 1G. Next page, please. Topic paper 1 raised 5 questions, which are shown in condensed form here. I will just highlight the key themes on which we asked for market input, and they focused on process-related disclosures in relation to responsibility for an integrated report, including systems, procedures and controls, as well as disclosures on key roles and responsibilities. We also probed the merits of a statement of responsibility on a voluntary basis, and finally, a possible need to clarify the term those charged with governance. Next slide, please. And if you can just bring up all of the bullets, please. If you can just click through the animation, please, you'll bring up 3. This one's got some sub-bullets, but just keep bringing them up. There's 3 major bullet points. Thank you. Now, the results from topic paper 1 feedback, analysis by the IRC team, and deliberations by the framework panel led to the following recommendations that you see on the screen. There's just one final one, if you could bring that up, please. The IR framework was very much considered a useful element of integrated reporting, and the feedback overwhelmingly supported maintaining the statement of responsibility, but simplifying it by removing the required commentary on the application of a collective mind, eliminating the need to comment on plans for a future statement of responsibility, and also clarifying that full IR framework adherence is not a requirement for paragraph 1.20. The IR framework should also encourage process-oriented disclosures as either a supplement to a statement of responsibility or as a recommended alternative to the statement of responsibility where legal or regulatory requirements preclude such a statement. And there's one final bullet, if you could bring that up, please. And finally, the IR framework should clarify the scope of the term those charged with governance. Now, in establishing these recommendations, the framework panel considered signs of emerging acceptance of the statement in select regions, the underlying purpose of the statement of responsibility, which includes the promotion of accountability at the organisation's top level, the merits of information integrity for investors and other users of integrated reports, and the need to balance the interests of report users against the regulatory burden and liability concerns incurred by report preparers. And if we now move to the next slide, we can see how the proposed revisions to the required statement of responsibility have translated into proposals to revise the framework wording. And you see the first 3 consultation questions at the right-hand side of the slide. So if I just talk through the changes, barriers to the adoption of paragraph 1.20, as I mentioned, include real or perceived conflicts with local regulations, as well as the burden of complying with multiple standards and frameworks. So in relation to removing the required commentary on the application of a collective mind, which was previously the second bullet point of paragraph 1.20, there is a redundancy in that requirement, given the inherent expectation that those charged with governance maintain a holistic view of the organisation as they discharge their duties. The term collective mind is also considered by both preparers and assurance providers to be imprecise in both concept and terminology. The required commentary on plans for a future statement of responsibility, which was previously the second half of paragraph 1.20, has been removed because in certain circumstances, including legal considerations and compliance with multiple standards and frameworks, this may actually preclude a statement of responsibility. Phase-in disclosures of such a statement are therefore inapplicable for some. So the proposal we've put forward seeks to limit the burden on report preparers when other information, such as process-related information, can meet the requirements underlying purpose. The next change clarifies that full adherence to the IR framework is not a prerequisite to apply paragraph 1.20. The path to IR framework adherence is a function of an organisation's circumstances as well as its stage of maturity in integrated reporting. Those new to integrated reporting may hesitate to address paragraph 1.20 for its in accordance clause. The current revision should broaden the requirement to include an option to comment on the extent to which the integrated report is prepared in accordance with the IR framework. And I can see some further comments coming through. Please just give me a minute to pull them up. Amir Jamal, I might just hold your comment until Lakmika presents on topic paper 2, which covers the business model. So if we can please come back to that comment. And then a further comment, all bold IR framework paragraphs have clear requirements, whereas in 1.20, it has terms like can include. For example, either it should be or unbold the paragraph. Well, thank you very much. That's exactly the sort of feedback that we would like to hear. So if you feel there can be a little bit of room for interpretation, that's something we will certainly look at, because we want it to be very clear and not sort of have subjective application of the framework. So thank you very much for that comment. Does anyone have any comments on any of those first 3 questions at this point? Do you think that the adjustments in paragraph 1.20 simplify the statement? I'd be very pleased to hear if people think it does or it doesn't. And question 2 asks, does the framing of process disclosures meet the goals of promoting accountability and integrity while still providing flexibility? And then does the consultation draft strike an appropriate balance between maintaining a principles-based approach to process-related disclosures and usefully informing preparer considerations? Well, there's no comments coming through, but I'm sure we'll have time to cover that when we come to the panel discussion. Just one question, no discussion on assurance practices in the framework. The framework itself does have a number of assurance friendly features, which we've been encouraged to maintain. The IRC has also been encouraged to ensure it continues to add its voice to the debate around assurance matters. We have also made a contribution to the IAASB's project on extended external audit. So I don't expect we will be including more specific information on assurance within the framework. If anything were to be put out by the IRC, I would suggest it would be in the form of supplementary guidance. And we have a comment, it will be difficult to identify to what extent the framework has been applied, being a principles-based framework. In terms of application of the framework, I would encourage you to all revisit the 19 bold letter requirements of the framework, because it is adhering to those 19 bold letter requirements that determine whether you have presented your report in accordance with the framework or not. We do get a lot of similar comments about the framework being principles-based, which yes, it is. But the 19 bold letter requirements that come at the end of the document what companies should be assessing their report content against to ensure that they have addressed those 19 bold letter requirements. Thank you. Now, Meta, who said yes, the adjustments do simplify the statement in an effective way. And in response to Maria's question, how's the IRC considering the interaction of the IR framework with region-specific reporting frameworks to demonstrate its relationship with legislative frameworks or highlight differences and gaps? To that respect, Maria, the IRC team itself, there's less than 30 people in our team, so we do work very, very closely with local networks. And in terms of putting out guidance or other materials in response to the issue that you've raised, we would certainly be looking to work with local networks to produce national or region-specific guidance. We simply don't have the resources, unfortunately, at this point in time. So we do very much heavily rely on our local networks to produce guidance such as that you've mentioned. I might, if I can move on with the slides, I'm just conscious of time and we still have to hear from Lakmika and Graham. So if we can move to the next slide, please. Consultation question 4 relates to the term those charged with governance. And many ask if those charged with governance can include senior management and cover various governance models. Now, in response, we've extended the glossary's definition of those charged with governance to include management. And you see that by the highlighted text on the right-hand side of the page. And the consultation question asks whether the glossary sufficiently clarifies the inclusion of management personnel in the scope of those charged with governance. So I'd be interested in people's comments on that. And I'll move forward to the next slide, thank you. Question 5 relates to 2 additional paragraphs that have been added to the framework, which relate to the fact that there is no one universal governance model that is followed around the world. So we have added 2 additional paragraphs of text to recognise that there are many variations in governance models. And so the consultation question asks if the new wording included in the framework sufficiently recognises these variation in governance models. So again, I'm very interested in your thoughts on that. So just keep the comments coming through. But at that point, I'm going to now hand over to Lakmika. But please continue to use the chat function throughout the call. Thank you. Over to you, Lakmika.
Thank you very much, Liz. I assume everybody can hear me well?
We can hear you.
Right. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Okay, so moving to topic paper 2, which focuses on business model considerations. So why did the IRC re-engage the market on this topic? The first reason was continued confusion between the concept of outputs and outcomes. So if you're an automotive manufacturer, for example, your output is the car and your outcomes include 1, the enhanced mobility and convenience for customers, 2, increased air emissions, and number 3, higher fossil fuels fuel depletion, assuming we are not talking about electric vehicles, obviously. So there is quite a distinction to be made between outputs and outcomes. But a review of integrated reports a few years ago showed that many, not all, but many, overlooked on outcomes in their reports. And as one respondent to our 2017 consultation observed, by omitting outcomes, integrated reports rather miss the mark. The second concern to the missing the mark point is that, so if a report preparer fail to identify outcomes, then they fail to equip readers with the information needed to decide whether the value overall is created, preserved, or eroded. The third concern relates to imbalanced reporting. So for those who do discuss outcomes in their reports, they tend to showcase only the good news and overlook their negative outcomes and trade-offs. Finally, some believe that the framework covers impacts to direct stakeholders like customers, employees, and investors, but not the wider and often times longer term impact on indirect stakeholders, including society and the natural environment. Can we move to the next slide, please? So in terms of this particular slide, and this isn't the case as the framework definition of outcomes actually does incorporate longer term impacts on society, the natural environment, and others. So we saw the need to address the coverage of impacts more explicitly in the framework. So a second proposal addresses the output versus outcome confusion. And there are several ways to go about this, including making a simple tweak to the framework's value creation diagram. So whereas the original diagram as depicted here includes all 4 components in blue, inputs, activities, outputs, and outcomes in a solid block, it might help to clearly distinguish between the mechanics of the business model so that so what goes on goes in, what's done, and what comes out into something a little bit more clearer. Can we have the next slide, please? The one before, please. So here, and the result of that mechanism is this. So in addition to other measures, the simple visual trick might encourage preparers to think more deeply about the car, going back to our early example, and the results of or outcomes of that car on customers, employees, society, and natural environment. So this kind of separates out and puts a focus on the outcomes. Next slide, please. So the topic paper 2 raised 4 key questions for the market. The first one, should examples and visual techniques elevate the importance of outcomes? Number 2, should outcomes and value creation be linked more explicitly through an example? Number 3, should the importance of balanced reporting be reinforced more strongly? And finally, should the framework clarify its coverage of impacts on society and nature? So if you can keep these questions in mind and provide some feedback on that, that will be great. Let's move to the next slide, please. There was overwhelming support for all proposals put forth in topic paper 2. And in reviewing this feedback, the framework panel developed the following set of recommendations. Firstly, the framework was encouraged, or rather can encourage, stronger business model reporting by clarifying the distinction between outputs and outcomes, by elevating the importance of outcomes by linking more explicitly to value creation, preservation, and erosion, promoting greater balance in the reporting of outcomes, clarifying the framework's coverage of wider impact under the term outcomes. In establishing these recommendations, the framework panel considered market feedback, obviously, interpretative challenges in the existing framework text, and observed market practices. Can we move to the next slide, please? Can we move to the next slide, please? The one before, please. Thank you. Let's look at how these proposals play out in the consultation draft. We distinguish outputs from outcomes by reminding report preparers of the definition of outcomes right where they need it. In paragraph 4.19, previously, framework users had to dig back to the glossary section. So this new addition is highlighted in the opening paragraph of the excerpts of the on the right. Okay. We also include a simple example as shown in the second column of the excerpts. And again, this distinguishes between outputs and outcomes. Next, we address the issue of imbalance reporting of outcomes at the very end of this excerpt by referencing the importance of using qualitative and quantitative information to explain outcomes. So this places great emphasis on evidence-based disclosures rather than empty or baseless claims about organizational effects on capitals. So we see here two consultation questions related to the revised paragraph 4.19. And we are keen to hear your early views, recognizing that you're seeing this for the first time right now. But are we moving in the right direction with these steps? So again, just to put the two questions, does paragraph 4.16 sufficiently differentiate outputs from outcomes? Does the final sentence in paragraph 4.19 sufficiently encourage evidence-based reporting outcomes? So we have a couple of questions. So we're talking about paragraph 4.19 proposed to replace the word consequences with impact for better clarity. Similarly, for question 8, in last para of the word effect should be replaced with the word impacts. Liz, any thoughts on this?
I'm sorry, had to unmute myself there.
That's all right.
We've had a lot of debate at both the technical team level and with the IR framework panel about the term impact. Impact is getting, the word itself is getting a lot of attention through various reporting initiatives underway at the moment. The IRC's intention has always been that what people tend to recognise as impacts being those longer term effects and generally on society and the environment. We've always envisaged those impacts being captured under the term outcomes. And in the process of this current framework revision, we did revisit this definition, and it comes up in a later question about whether we're capturing impacts adequately under that definition. We have decided that at this point in time, our research shows that there is no single definition of the word impacts. And because we did stress that this is a light touch revision of the framework, we don't feel it's the appropriate time for us to separate impacts from outcomes. So I take your point about changing the word consequences. I was just looking at that wording then and thinking, well, the terminology elsewhere in the framework talks about the effects on the capital. So I think even if we change it to outcomes being the internal and external effects, both positive and negative, on the capitals as a result, I think that would bring more consistency to the text within the framework itself. But I do understand the point that you're making. And sorry, the second question that came up. Sorry, there's a lot of questions coming through now, which is great, but I'm just making sure that, similarly for question 8 in the last paragraph, the word effect should be, okay, well, that was the point I was just addressing then. I think we will definitely be sticking with the word effects rather than going for impacts for the very reasons that I've hopefully just explained to you. Lakmeka, I'll hand back to you.
No worries. So there are a couple of other questions. There's one already mentioned, a question, sorry, 2.21 already mentioned the purpose, but this time it highlights the model diagram. So there's a positive comment there about the change. There's also a comment from Aroni who mentions legal issues and fears of legal issues continue to inhibit disclosures of negative outcomes. Any thoughts on how we can address that, Liz? I think that's a valid question.
That similar sentiment has arisen in other discussion groups where people think that companies, even though we're trying to encourage greater balance in reporting, sorry, just, I beg your pardon, one of my children's just come in, sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah, we're trying to encourage better balance in reporting, but people raise the issue of, you know, does wording in a framework change behaviour? And perhaps not necessarily. So people tend to embellish the positives, and that's very much what our research, which you spoke about, like Mika, shows, is that we have a natural tendency to accentuate the positive. But I think in this day and age, when, especially when, you know, with electronic communications and the speed at which news travels, you know, you think of the damage from one disgruntled employee and how that can damage a company's reputation. I think companies are quite naive to try and hide the bad news anymore. And because the consequences for, you know, not disclosing, particularly in Australia, we have continuous disclosure requirements. So there are penalties for withholding information that should have been made available to the public. So I think we do need to continue to press forward to encourage companies to give a balanced view, because no one expects everything's going to go right all the time. And I think when you read reports, it stands out very obviously when there's, you know, not a single bad thing that happened, because that's not the way, you know, business life works. So I think we are moving in the right direction anyway, because transparency is such a hot topic, and I think we're going to see that very clearly in, you know, the next reporting cycles in relation to the COVID pandemic. You know, that the pandemic that we're all currently experiencing is impacting on every business around the world in different ways. And I think investors and other stakeholders will be expecting to see a very clear interpretation of the impacts and how the company is addressing them. So I think, you know, at this point in time, if you came out with a positive, you know, glowing report without mentioning of the impacts, it will be incredibly obvious. And perhaps the pandemic, you know, one good thing that might come out of it is to encourage greater transparency and realising, you know, not everything goes according to plan, but to be upfront about that and address it and say, yes, this isn't what we expected, but this is how we've gone about it. That's how you can establish credibility rather than trying to hide issues. So that would be my comment on that one.
Thank you, Liz. I think you covered a couple of questions that are there in terms of negative and positive reporting. I think you kind of captured everything here. There's one other small question about by Umair Khan and also by Maria Howlander relating to the value creation and outcomes. But I think that is there anything that you want to comment on that, or shall we take that as an offline discussion?
Well, perhaps I see the effect that someone raised a comment about the last paragraph, and I think we've covered that in terms of, you know, consequences and whether the word impact should be used. We've covered that. Perhaps if we could bring up the next slide, which actually has the value creation diagram.
Yeah.
So that we're talking to that one. I did see that. Next slide, please.
Next slide,
I did
please.
see one of the changes that's been made in this diagram is highlighted at the top of the middle square above the business model itself, is the addition of the word purpose alongside mission and vision. Now, this term has been added to recognise that a lot of companies are now talking about their purpose some still use the term mission and vision. We've really included the term purpose to recognise the fact that this is the direction many companies are moving into in terms of defining or disclosing what their purpose is. We've been asked, you know, why isn't it defined in the framework? Well, I'd point out that mission and vision are also not defined in the framework. Another term that's not defined in the framework is the word value. And the reason that value, for example, is not defined in the framework, it is a very subjective term, and it is up to the organisation itself to explain what value means to them. And purpose is in a similar way. It's not, I don't feel that it's up to the IRC to dictate to companies what their purpose means. This is something, and we've created more of a list that you can choose from, because we're just trying to show through this diagram how it relates to many different organisations. So we will not be defining purpose within the framework itself. And I would just mention this issue's come up in many of the sessions. So I hope that.
Sure, Liz.
Mm-hmm.
Hello?
Yes? Can you hear me?
Yep. Yeah, I can hear you now. Sorry.
Yeah. Someone else has, oh, sorry, there's a couple more comments coming through. Any new capital types observed so far by the IRC? I think when we were defining the 6 capitals, we feel that they are quite broad in terms of what they encapsulate. There is another misconception within the framework itself that companies need to report on all 6 capitals, but you are encouraged to report on the capitals that are relevant and material to your business in terms of the contribution to value creation. So if you were an organisation that you know, the natural environment didn't have any impact on your business, you would not be expected to talk about it in the report. So I hope that clarifies any confusion for people on that matter. But no, we haven't really had discussions on any new types of capital. The only conversations I've had in sort of along this theme would be perhaps I've had people mention ethical capital to me, but I think that could still be captured under the existing definitions that we have. So I'd say no, no new capital types that we've seen. Now there's another comment. The organisational business model also creates an impact on the capitals that are not directly owned or controlled. Those capitals are not directly input into the organisation business model. And in this case, the quality of input capitals remains unaffected. How can this be presented in the diagram? I would be very interested in your suggestions, Naveed, as to how we might do that. Because the way that we have tried to capture that is, if you look at the diagram on the screen and the word inputs, it's half within the grey outline, like the white box with the grey outline in the middle. The inputs is half in and half out of that box, and that is meant to reflect that inputs to the business model may not be necessarily owned by the organisation itself. Similar to outcomes, some of the outcomes will be on the organisation and its capitals, others may be on external elements such as society or the natural environment.
Liz, can I just make a comment on, there are a couple of questions in relation to the value created. So again, touching base on what you said earlier on the purpose, mission and vision. Now, there are a couple of issues of understanding how to incorporate this value creation process into this diagram. In my view, it's already created, it's already captured because of the component in the middle, which is the purpose, vision, and mission, the governance structures, the strategy, risks, performance, and outlook, which forms the governance structures and the overarching organization. And then you have the business model in between. And all of these combined is what creates value. And it's a very good point that you mentioned that, defining value is very difficult because of a number of reasons, because it depends on organization to organization. For example, not-for-profits and charity-based organizations, they are not profit-based. So their view of value is something completely different to, for example, a company that is purely for-profit and so forth. So I think that's an important element to consider. And also there was a question here in relation to SMEs and small to medium enterprises, so to be specific. And in relation to those, I think the framework in terms of understanding value for those organizations, it's the integrated thinking component of it that comes in. I mean, it's not necessarily the report. I think there is a bit of a confusion in terms of when you say integrated reporting, that it's about the report. The report is an outcome of the process of integrated thinking and what goes on internally. So I just wanted to clarify that and highlight that. So there are a couple of other questions, but I am mindful of time. So we'll take one more question and then move on. There was talking about with management may not be willing to disclose some of the negative outcomes. Shouldn't there be a check and balance in this disclosure process, either via external auditors' opinion or disclosure on the disclosures? Now, in terms of that, there are obviously assurance aspects which can come sometime in the future. So I'm not going to comment on that yet, but that's something that I think Graham will touch on the next next topic paper. So I'll leave that to him. I think we better move on given the time. So if I can move to the next slide, please.
Yeah, I might try and answer some questions online so people can at least see a response. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz. So a review of randomly selected integrated reports found that in a quarter of cases, negative outcomes were overlooked. So you're absolutely right for those comments in terms of some of the negative outcomes not being shown. Positive results were amplified, obviously, and emotional language cast outcomes in a more favorable light. In response, the consultation draft says the following. Addresses an inherent bias in the term value creation by reminding IR framework users of the potential for value preservation or value erosion. Although paragraph 1.6 and 2.14 of the framework identifies that the term value creation also includes instances where value is preserved or diminished, the proposal you see here is an extract of how the term value creation has been changed to also include references to value preservation and value erosion. So that kind of answers some of the questions that were asked here in terms of how do we deal with this negative aspects in an organization. So do you think putting the increased emphasis on value preservation and value erosion encourages a more balanced reporting outcomes? We are very pleased to get some comments on that, why or why not. So can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. And now looking at the impact in particular, market feedback has encouraged a clarification of the IR framework's coverage of impacts, often linked to the natural environment or society at large. Impacts generally refer to an organization's positive or negative effects, whether indirect or direct, or near or long-term in nature. In response, the consultation draft inserts a clarifying statement to paragraph 4.20. The statement reads, by addressing positive and negative effects across the capitals, as well as short, medium, and long-term consequences for direct stakeholders and society at large, an integrated report enables users to evaluate the organization's wider impact. So the consultation question is, does the closing sentence of paragraph 4.20 sufficiently address the coverage of impacts under the term outcomes? Why or why not? So we are happy to hear some comments on this, please. So there is a question by Aruni about the layoffs that are stemming down from COVID-19 to be viewed as an erosion of value. I have a client who believes it is a creation of value to the organization. So I think, at least correct me if I'm wrong, but my take on that is there is a reduction in one capital and an increase in another. So it's an exchange of different capitals. So the erosion of capitals in this case is the human capital from my view. And also there could be an erosion of social and relationships capital. And then the increase would be the preservation of financial capital. So it depends on how an organization wants to balance itself in terms of its capitals and where it sees itself in the long run.
That's
any thoughts on
exactly. I would say exactly the same, because you may have a positive effect on financial capital, as you say, but if those employees were long-term experienced and strong performers, you'd have a significant detrimental effect on the intellectual capital of the organisation. So, you know, there will be trade-offs, because you might get rid of some senior staff because they cost you the most, but when they leave, a lot of intellectual capital goes with them. So it is a trade-off between the capitals.
Right. And also social and relationships capital,
Yes.
because the organization is seen in a negative light because of the
exactly.
fact. So
yeah.
I can give a good example. In Australia, Kmart actually said that, given the stores are closed in Kmart, there's a 6-week lockdown, and the CEO had said they are going to actually pay for those staff members who are on lockdown for that period. And that actually created a positive impact on the organization, though there's a financial cost to them. So the financial capital would go down, but the social and relationships capital, human and intellectual capital, will possibly rise. So that is a good example of answering this question, Aruni. So
Yes.
there is another one by Nomita who says, can value creation be measured to rate the review of value creation by auditor of IR? Can value creation be rated in degree or numbers? Ooh, that's an interesting one. Any thoughts on that, please?
That is an interesting one. And I think in terms of being able to measure value creation, that's the intention of the IR framework is not that you need to monetize everything. But I think, you need to look at the KPIs that the organisation set for themselves in terms of, how they're achieving their strategic objectives. And I would expect that the good companies have KPIs that reflect success across the organisation, not, divisional KPIs, because you want to see evidence that integrated thinking is happening, so that impacts and effects on the capitals are not being looked at in isolation. So I think you can certainly give a sense of the value created or preserved or destroyed. And actually another thing this comes back to is in terms of audit. I think, the value of auditors looking at processes and controls is highlighted in this instance, because similar to companies who are just, focusing on the positives, that's why the value of the audit becomes even greater, to look at the systems, processes, controls, the culture of the organisation, to consider how all of that factors into the organisation's results. But in terms of being able to give a specific measure, it's very difficult.
Can I just add to that, as an academic and a researcher in this area in terms of measuring? So my viewpoint is that, not everything needs, as Liz rightfully said, not everything needs to have a number-based measure. There are other ways of measuring value creation, and some could be qualitative and some could be quantitative. So
Yes.
there is different ways of measuring different capitals. For example, social and relationships capital is not necessarily based on a number. So environmental capital is not necessarily based on a number. There are different elements that could be used to measure certain capitals, which necessarily may not relate to a specific number. Again, I take the example of a non-profit organization, let's say you're doing something that is not based on profit. So in that case, maybe the number of trees planted or the O2 released to the environment or something like that could be a measure in terms of numbers, but also some of the calculations in terms of value to the environment is not quantifiable by numbers. So I think Liz rightfully said that not everything needs to be measured in numbers. So it's depending on the type of capital, depending on the organization, you can use narrative measures. So you can actually talk about the capital and how it affects in terms of value creation and so forth. So I think there's one last question that I'll take. Why only to direct stakeholders is the word direct essential there?
That's an excellent comment. I mean, yes, we don't, I agree. We don't necessarily have to include the word direct in front of stakeholders. That's a great point. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And if there are no other questions, I'll hand over to Graham to continue the discussion on discussion paper 3.
Thank you very much, Lakmika.
Pleasure, Graham. Thank you.
I think we've had some really good questions and points that have come up, and hopefully somebody's capturing this, because it would be, you know, if we lose some of these comments, it would be a bit of a shame. So hopefully they will go through to the IRRC. I'm going to now focus on topic paper 3. So just let me mute that. Right, so finally we come to topic paper 3, which is, as Liz said earlier, a catch-all for longer term considerations for both the framework and for the IRRC's strategy. Whereas topic papers 1 and 2 probe matters related to the current framework revision, topic paper 3 maintained a longer term strategic view. The first area topic paper 3 explored was a possible clarification of the purpose of the integrated report. Some think the framework's purpose section puts investors first and ranks financial capital above all other forms of capital. And although this wasn't the framework's intent, in studying paragraphs 1.7 and 1.8 quite carefully, this is a reasonable and understandable interpretation by some in the marketplace. Topic paper 3 also posed questions on how technology and assurance will feature into the future of integrated reporting. With respect to assurance, the questions asked how aggressively the IRRC ought to champion the cause versus leaving assurance matters primarily with regulators and related standard setters. And finally, topic paper 3 concluded with an open question to explore other considerations the market believes the IRRC should be mindful of as it looks beyond 2020. The responses to this question will be reviewed internally by the IRRC to determine any actions to take. Could we change the slide, please? The question from topic paper 3 covering the purpose of an integrated report has been included in the current consultation. Although this issue lies beyond the scope of the current framework revision, the strength and quality of arguments received from the focused engagement warrant further market feedback on this issue. The original question raised in topic paper 3 related to the purpose of an integrated report and was in 2 parts. The first part addressed the perception that financial capital ranks above all other forms of capital by proposing a wording change to paragraph 1.7 to delete the word financial and in its edited form have the purpose of an integrated report explain to providers of capital generally about how an organization creates value over time. Could we have the next slide? Thank you. The second part of the question addressed the criticism that investor-tailored reporting puts investors first and promotes investor primacy. This issue could potentially be resolved, assuming the previous change to paragraph 1.7 was adopted, by revising paragraph 1.8 to reflect all beneficiaries of integrated reports, including providers of financial capital. Could we have the next slide? The matter of purpose of an integrated report is widely debated area of the framework. The slide shows the major arguments from the focused engagement feedback, both for and against the proposed changes to paragraph 1.7. There was strong support for the idea as it aligns with the fundamentals of integrated reporting and encourages disclosure on the full range of capitals on which organizations rely or have an effect. On the other hand, some cautioned against reducing the relevance of integrated reports to investors, as well as noting it would lead to a more complicated materiality assessment and have potential adverse impacts on the principle of conciseness. The strength of arguments both for and against the proposed wording changes from providers of financial capital to providers of other forms of capital have led to the matter being included in the consultation draft for the purpose of further discussion and reaction. Question 11, if we could have that. Next slide. Thanks. Question 11 in the consultation draft deals with the purpose of an integrated report by asking if paragraph 1.7 should extend beyond providers of financial capital alone to include providers of other forms of capital. Does anyone have any specific comments on that? So we'll pause here for any questions around this or comments that people might have around that. I see that there are some comments that have come up here. Sorry, Liz, I'm just, are there? Yeah, we've got somebody saying.
Yes, there was a question about assurance over integrated reports, and yes, we are seeing examples of companies obtaining limited assurance over their integrated reports. I've listed a few there in the chat function. Okay. You could look at the reports of ABN AMRO, which is a Dutch bank, CBUS, which is an Australian pension fund, CPA Australia have their integrated report assured. The IRC had its last 2 reports assured. So we are seeing examples. I'm not aware yet of anyone obtaining reasonable assurance over their integrated report at this point in time, but we do expect it will come in the near future.
Right, I see one comment here. I believe it should be limited to providers of financial capital.
That's in relation to 1.7, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. IFAC is strongly opposed to extending 1.7 beyond providers of financial capital. I wasn't aware of that. Any example of any capital provided by people other than investors? Well, yeah, I mean, that's what the integrated report actually provides. We have employees providing human capital, intellectual capital, so that there are lots of forms of capital that organizations, that other stakeholders provide through the 6 capitals. In addition to financial capital. Can I just
provide a comment there, if you don't mind, Graham?
Sure.
Look, as an academic and person who views it a little bit on a holistic manner, I mean, I think all the capitals are equally important, and I'm just in 2 minds whether it should be purely focused at providers of financial capital, because financial capital is 1/6 of the total capitals that provide value or value creation that comes into value creation. Therefore, if you focus it on just one provider of capital, of one type of capital, and excluding others, then it won't be as balanced as it should be in terms of the heart of integrated reporting. I understand from IFAC's viewpoint why that could be important, but we are moving away from shareholder primacy into a concept of what we call a holistic view of a more inclusive view of society and other stakeholders. So I think from that perspective, I think it should be focused on the broader providers of capital. But in saying that, yes, there is some understanding that obviously financial capital is equally important as other capitals as well. So therefore, it should not lose that focus, but then it should also start refocusing itself on other capitals. Thank you.
Can I, Graham and Lakmika, we have my former colleague from the IRC, Laura Lecker, who is representing IFAC on today's call. Laura, if I could just ask you to explain IFAC's position on 1.7, because I think participants on the call would be very interested to hear. Laura?
Sure, no problem, Liz, and thank you for asking. As I mentioned, I think IFAC is strongly opposed to extending paragraph 1.7 beyond providers of financial capital. I think we share the concerns over the conciseness of the report and whether you could effectively meet the communication needs of all stakeholders through a single report. We had some discussions with members sort of when we were compiling the draft response to the consultation, and one of the examples that stuck with me was that I think if you think about providers of other types of capital, so the example given was that if for most organizations, providers of human capital are very significant, and actually would the integrated report be the primary means of communication with employees, and I'm not sure that it would. So I think, and then the other reasons that we had for not wanting to extend it beyond providers of financial capital, we thought it was important that integrated reporting remains aligned with the IASB's management practice commentary statement. And I think, or management commentary practice statement either, sorry. And the other point that we thought was important to consider is whether if the primary purpose of an integrated report was extended beyond providers of financial capital, whether that would have any unintended implications for an assurance engagement. Because if you, an assurance practitioner would have to consider when they do an assurance engagement, they need to consider the intended users of an assurance report, but then in turn, they would also need to consider the users of the integrated report itself. And I think as that gets extended, that becomes more complex for the assurance practitioner.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think this is a very interesting area. And the people that look at all these comments are going to have to sift through them, and it's going to be quite a difficult process. I'd like to just add one other element to it. And in South Africa, there's been a lot of discussion around this. And the belief is, among some people, is that we don't actually have to point out who the report is prepared for, or the primary purpose. We think that we could, or some people believe that 1.7 could read, the primary purpose of an integrated report is to explain how an organization creates value over time, and then just make the adjustment to 1.8 as I mentioned earlier on. That's another angle that some people might be coming from. So it's really an interesting area. We're not going to solve that problem here, but I think it's helpful to have these various points of view coming through, because you know, there are different points of view and different arguments and consequences of changes. So I propose that I carry on, because I think, Liz, we're probably running out of time, aren't we?
Yes, we do need to keep moving, but I was just going to say there is always a lot of discussion on that paragraph 1.7, and that's exactly why we have included it again, because we need to get further market feedback on their views on that matter. So thank you, but yes, I think we should move on. Thanks, Graham.
Thanks. Okay, so if we could then move to the next slide. Okay. Although there is no specific question on assurance in the consultation draft, I wanted to draw to your attention to the two assurance-related questions in the topic paper 3 and the market feedback received. 76 respondents offered detailed feedback to this question. Suggestions to enhance the assurance readiness of integrated reports included: 1, continue to collaborate and learn from others; 2, providing additional guidance and examples in related areas such as internal processes and controls. The IIRC is also encouraged to maintain an assurance-friendly approach in the international framework. The detailed analysis of the feedback to this and all other questions from the 3 topic papers is included in the companion document in the to the consultation draft. But there is no specific question on the topic of assurance in the consultation draft. But Liz, I guess people could, in the final question, could add comments there about assurance if they so wanted to do. So if we could move on to the next slide. Moving on to, sorry, we're moving then on to question 12. I think have we gone too far?
Yeah.
Yeah. Moving on to question 12 and external reporting standards and frameworks. The IR framework is often used in conjunction with other reporting standards and frameworks, but with its principle-based approach, it does not prescribe which standards or frameworks to use, nor does it point to particular indicators or measurement methods. There is, however, a growing market appetite for clearer links to the indicators and methodologies of other standards, frameworks, and initiatives. So the question 12 says, do you support the creation of a resource, e.g. an online database, to showcase the authoritative sources of indicators and methodologies across capitals? If yes, to which standards, frameworks, or initiatives should the resource point? If we could then move on to the next question, which is question 13. Question 13 relates to integrated thinking. Integrated thinking is defined in the IR framework, and the concept is further addressed in the IRRC's online FAQs, or frequently asked questions. In 2018, the IRRC launched the Integrated Thinking and Strategy Group to translate the concept of integrated thinking into practice through illustrative case studies. Yet there are continued calls for a more comprehensive explanation of integrated thinking. So should the IRRC more fully address the concept of integrated thinking? If yes, what additional guidance is needed? So it would be helpful if people would comment on that. But I will then move on to the next question. Next slide, please. Question 14. There was a wide range of responses received to the topic paper 3 on technology and analysis of feedback, is detailed in the consultation materials. There was clear support for the IRRC to anticipate future corporate reporting mechanisms, identify the needs and interests of report preparers to understand the practical benefits enabled by technology, and engage more closely with information users to better understand how information is sourced and applied. Many consider technology a key enabler of more connected, comparable, and reliable information. So question 14 asks, should the IRRC explore the role of technology in future corporate reporting as a matter of priority? If yes, what technology considerations should be addressed? And then moving on to the final question, if we could go to the last slide. I think you need to go again. Next, yeah, thanks. Then question 15, the final question in the consultation draft provides an opportunity for the market to raise matters not already addressed by the earlier questions. So please provide any comments not already addressed by your responses to questions 1 to 14. Liz, I think I don't see any other questions coming up here. Somebody saying technology, yes, a priority. Personally, I think that if the IRC doesn't pursue technology, and it's going to run behind what is happening in the real world. So I think it's very important that it does pursue this. What should happen is going to be very, very difficult, because if one talks about real-time reporting and so on, when you're talking about intangibles, it becomes very difficult. But I think it is very important that the IRC should focus on technology changes that need to go with the framework.
Yeah, and Graham, just to address the point raised, someone said that they're disappointed with no additions with respect to technology impacts on the corporate reporting. Why? I don't think that's something that can be easily addressed within the framework, because the technology landscape is changing so quickly that by the time we've done our review and we change the framework, there's probably something new out there. It's definitely an area that we will continue to monitor, and we are looking at re-establishing a technology initiative, which we did have some time ago and which sadly was put on the shelf just simply through a lack of resources. It's obviously a very hot topic, but I think to put something in the framework and keep it very concise would be very, very difficult, because it is, a large area. So I think anything to come out from the IRC would be in the form of a supplementary paper, or perhaps one of the FAQs that we have. We could, continually update that. And someone else, yes.
About investors, which I think you've answered already, but I think you might want to reiterate what you said.
Yes, I did. Yes, we have been in touch with major investor groups who have been already working on their submission to the consultation draft. We have also had investors at the participating in many of the regional focus groups that have happened around the world. This is about the 22nd or 23rd of these meetings that we have held with the support of our local hosts, which we're very grateful for. So we've had investor representation there, and we know that we're getting submissions from investor bodies. The other thing, the IIRC did have an investor network that was operational during development of the framework. So the investor voice was heard very loudly and clearly during the development of the framework. And again, we are going to be re-establishing that investor network probably later this year. And another development following on from the examples that we're seeing in Australia, where pension funds and Australian pension funds are very influential in our capital market, because our retirement savings plan is dictated by the government. So a set percentage of our salaries must be put in our retirement savings plan. So that pool of money continues to grow over time, to the point where we'll be contributing 12% of our salaries. So the pot of money that our super funds control is enormous. And we have super funds in Australia that decided that if they wanted to get enhanced reporting from the companies that they invested in, they needed to set the example themselves by adopting integrated reporting, which is what they've done. So they've headed down the path of integrated reporting to be advocates for the market. And I would encourage everyone to have a look at the IIRC website. There is a 1.5-hour webinar that we recently held with David Atkins from CBUS, where he talks about their journey. And it's well worth setting some time aside to watch. I've also been speaking lately with Keith Ambakshir, who's very influential with many of the large global pension funds. So these are the institutional investors that are managing trillions of dollars. And I believe we're setting a meeting date for September, and we will be working with some of the largest funds in the world who will be starting their own integrated reporting adoption journeys. So there is definite investor interest, and we will be more public about some of those efforts in the coming months. Thank you.
There's a question here, or comment really, that IIRC should remain more articulated and connected with the users of the framework. And you know, I know there are a lot of groups that you have, and you're starting up some more. For example, in India, it looks as though there's some progress being made. There's quite a lot that happens in Sri Lanka and so on. But I think one of the answers to this is you need people on the ground, local people, to be able to engage and convey issues and so on. Do you have an answer to that?
Well, I would also point out that we do work with companies around the world through our business network. And if anyone wants to know more, please just let me know. I'd be happy to connect you with our business networks team. So we have network members in most countries around the world. So we are working very closely with them. But to Graham's point, yes, we do very much rely on our local networks. In Australia, we have a very active network. So we are continuing to meet as groups, and like Mika is very involved as well, as the Deakin IR Centre is going to be hosting those meetings going forward. But we would like to see those networks active in every country around the world as soon as we can. So please, people on the call who do not have a local network, please get in touch with us so we can work with you to establish one. Thank you.
There's a comment here, one consideration, maybe the mandatory comment from those charged with governance in an integrated report on technological advancements and investments by the organization. If one reads the governance section, it does talk about the need for those charged with governance to drive innovation within the organization. So, I mean, it's a disclosure that one would like to see in reports.
Yeah.
Then need industry-specific standardized measurement framework to reporting different non-financial capitals. In addition, more researchers are required to establish the benefits of IR for investors.
Like Mika, do you want to comment on that one?
Sorry, can you repeat that again? I've lost you there for a minute. The sound dropped off.
Just had a question. More research is needed to more research is required to establish the benefits of IR for investors.
Yeah, look, that's so true, because currently the work we are doing is looking at investors and the usefulness of investors and reaction to investors in terms of capital markets and other markets. So there is a fair bit of research being done at the moment. We are currently developing an index looking at the top 200 listed companies in Australia and how their integrated reporting, by scoring their integrated reports and looking at its relationship with capital markets. So absolutely agree. There is one paper that has been done, which is quite high profile, which was published in one of the top tier journals by Mary Barth and Elmar Venter and Stephen Kahn, which actually showed a relationship between integrated reporting and the cost of capital. So there is, or capital markets, so to speak. So there is some research being done, and you're absolutely right. There's a lot more work that can be done in terms of the relationship between integrated reporting, investors, and capital markets. So couldn't agree more.
There's the last point, the overall comment, the principles list contains bullets 1 and 3, which are elements rather than principles. I don't fully understand that. Do you?
No, I was actually going to ask if Omer could maybe unmute themselves and raise the point. I'm not, sorry, I don't understand the comment.
Thank you very much for allowing this.
Thank you.
The framework starts with guiding principles, and there are 7 principles starting from strategic focus and future orientations that says an integrated report should provide insight into the organization's strategy. And then there is a 3rd bullet that says stakeholders relationship, and integrated report should provide insight into the nature and quality of this organization's relationship. These 2 bullets I feel is part of content and elements, which are the second summary, which are the elements rather than guiding principles. And they are there in the elements of 8 elements of the integrated reporting. There are 8 elements of integrated reporting that includes strategy and relationship capital, relationship explanation. So these are actually not principles, these are elements of the integrated reporting.
Okay. Thank you. I haven't heard that comment before, so thank you.
There's a lot of these are sort of more general questions. There's one here: while disruptive innovation is making business difficult to sustain, how can we reduce the volume of reporting to make organizations more attractive to adopt integrated reporting?
Hang on. Sorry. Wow, disruptive.
Yeah, I mean, my answer to that is.
Sorry, could you repeat, please?
Sorry?
Could you repeat the question, she said?
While disruptive innovation is making business difficult to sustain, how can we reduce the volume of reporting to make organizations more attractive to adopt integrated reporting? My answer to that would be that one needs to apply those guiding principles, and particularly materiality is important. And disruptive innovation is probably one of the issues that flows from the external environment. And most companies now would be dealing with disruptive innovation as one of its material issues that are affecting the organization. But I think the framework is set up in such a way as to achieve conciseness and deal with those things that are most material to the organization and to its value creation. So I think the way that the framework is constituted, it actually does enable organizations to focus on what is material and maintain a concise report which provides an overall holistic view of the organization. Because once you start getting into all the detail, it becomes very difficult to sort out what is material and what is not material. Liz, I'm not sure how we're doing time-wise, but do you want to take over from here?
Sure, thank you. Okay, if we can just move actually I should revert back to our hosts in terms of whether our panel members on the call had any comments to make. And I'm very conscious of time.
Anyone who wants to speak can maybe 1 minute. Anyone who has anything to speak. Aruni, you have anything?
Yes, Professor. One thing that we see is the disconnect between the materiality. So if you take a bank, for example, they have a very clear, well-established risk processes for Basel risks, right? But when it comes to other risks which impact the other capitals, that is not so well addressed in some cases. So this is just one example. When we do conglomerates, we see, you know, there's a central risk person who will have one sheet of risk, and materiality will be somebody else's ball game. So we are working with many clients to try and, you know, bring this together. And I was thinking perhaps the framework could provide stronger guidance on that connect between materiality and risk and the need to do so.
Okay. I do know that we are having some conversations with COSO at the moment on this very topic and you know, the relationship of integrated reporting and risk, which is very much tied to materiality, as you've raised. Again, I think this is something that's quite difficult to address succinctly within the framework, but I do take your point on board, and I will certainly report back to the framework panel on this point as to whether we can add a short paragraph or similar. But I think that's an area that, again, more detail would have to be made available in supplementary guidance. But it is an important point to raise, so thank you.
Laura, you have any comment?
Oh, sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I mean, just in the interest of time, I appreciate we've gone over time. I would just say, you know, IFAC is strongly supportive of the IRC and the IR framework, and you know, we very much welcome the first revision to the framework. I think it's an important step in continuing to its continued development. I would say, you know, IFAC is very broadly supportive of the proposed changes that have been discussed today. So in terms of topic paper 1, topic paper 2, I think we're very much supportive of the changes that have been made. I would say in our response to the IRC that we'll be submitting, we're very much focused on the issues from topic paper 3 and the more strategic forward-looking questions. I think a lot of IFAC's, you know, policy and advocacy work at the moment has been around looking at enhanced corporate reporting, and you know, there have been many consultations of late and that we've submitted responses to, and our messaging in that is consistent in that, you know, the IR framework is the only comprehensive reporting framework, and it is you know, it's you know, as part of the future of corporate reporting, I think IR has a big role to play in that. And I think, you know, that's kind of the headline messaging of our response to the IRC, is that, you know, in charting a path forward, the focus needs to be on how does the framework need to further evolve to be considered all-encompassing, connected conceptual framework for reporting. And you know, I spoke earlier about the primary audience and the focus on providers of financial capital. I think also, it's important to have those references to other relevant initiatives across the capitals, and that the integrated reporting is positioned as an immediate solution to current market demands, and things like link to the TCFD is important. And I appreciate Liz's comment earlier on impacts, and we think it's important to incorporate corporate impacts on society, the environment, but at the moment recognize that this is still a maturing field and that it could do with additional guidance before changes are made in the framework itself. So I think at this stage, we're supportive of the approach taken by the IRC so that impacts, the reference to impacts is relatively simple in the changes to paragraph 4.20. And then I think the other point that's highlighted in our response is just the need to elevate the emphasis on integrated thinking. I think that's what differentiates the IR framework from others. I think the definition of integrated thinking perhaps needs further clarification and practical application guidance. I think it's defined, described, applied in different ways. So I think that's that sort of sums up IFAC's position at the moment. But as I said, in terms of the changes that are being proposed, we're very supportive.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. I think due to time constraints, shall we hand over to our compeer to close up?
Yes, thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Professor Watawala. And I also take this opportunity to thank Ms. Liz Prescott for all the knowledge imparted. We also had Professor Lakmika Pereira with us, a senior academic corporate board member and experienced business consultant who has held a number of senior roles in academia, industry, global standard setters, and professional bodies. He serves on the panel of judges at the CMA Sri Lanka Annual Excellence in Integrated Reporting Awards. Thank you, Professor Lakmika Pereira. We are privileged by your presence here with us today. We were also privileged to have with us Mr. Graham Terry, the IIRC ambassador. Professor Graham Terry is an integrated reporting advisor and an ambassador for the International Integrated Reporting Council. He assisted in the establishment of the Annual Integrated Reporting Awards in Sri Lanka, sponsored by the Institute of Certified Management Accountants of Sri Lanka, and serves on the panel of judges. We were overwhelmed to have you with us today, sir. Thank you once again. As we come to the end of today's proceedings, I deem it a privilege to invite Mr. Manil Jaya Singha, board member of SAFA and the president of CA Sri Lanka, to deliver the vote of thanks.
You have to unmute, Manil, you have to unmute. You have to unmute, please. Still on mute here.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, Professor. Professor Lakshman Watawala, President of CMA, Mr. Ziaul Mustafa, President of SAFA, Liz Prescott, Dr. Lakmika Pereira, Mr. Graham Terry, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to deliver this vote of thanks at the conclusion of today's interactive forum, which focused on the revision of the integrated framework. And judging by the comments as well as the responses, it was truly an interactive session that we just witnessed. At the outset, I would like to extend my sincere appreciation to Professor Watawala and SAFA for taking the initiative and organizing this important event, which is very pertinent to us in South Asia. I would be failing in my duty if I did not recognize the valuable contribution of Ziaul Mustafa as well as Ms. Liz Prescott and Dr. Lakmika Pereira and Mr. Graham Terry for their insightful contribution to today's session, and also answering many questions that came up in the chat. Many of you all will know that CA Sri Lanka has been in the forefront of embracing integrated reporting framework in the region. We have quite a few companies who have adopted IR as professional bodies. Both CA Sri Lanka and CMA Sri Lanka have been encouraging companies by organizing award ceremonies to to recognize their contribution and in adoption of IR. For example, Sri Lanka has its annual report award ceremony, and as a part of that, we have a separate segment which recognizes companies for uh, adopting IR framework, while CMA has a specific award which gives for excellence in integrated reporting, and SAFA also in its best presented annual report awards, it has a special section on a special award on integrated reporting category, which recognizes companies in the region for adopting IR. So all this just to mention or impress upon is that in this region we do take integrated reporting seriously. I think we have now reached a point in time where we no longer only must focus on profits of organizations, instead emphasize on the need to be more responsible by contributing not just the bottom line but also to society and environment, and obviously the capitals that the IR framework basically enumerates. As I think Liz mentioned, the critical factor is now about communicating value to its stakeholders. As the present day guardians of the profession, we believe that all have a responsibility, all of us have a responsibility towards the future generation by protecting our resources so they too can enjoy what we have. Therefore, there is an increasing need to encourage more and more companies to adopt the framework so that they recognize and understand the importance of remaining responsible. In such a scenario, I believe that it's a welcome move by IIRC to revise the international framework to suit the requirements of the current context. Living in a world which evolves every minute, and I think that is so true these days, because you can see what the pandemic has brought about to the world. We also need to understand the meaning of remaining progressive instead of being left behind. So today we heard some very important inputs by the speakers and the panelists who have given us a greater understanding in relation to the revision of the framework and the insights as to what is required in responding to this to the framework or to the exposure draft. We as professional bodies have a great role to play in ensuring more companies comprehend and the need to adopt with time more and move ahead if we are to remain truly successful. SAFA and together with CS Sri Lanka and CMA look forward to working with the IIRC in the months and years ahead in ensuring that every company will ultimately adopt this important framework. First of all, by ensuring that we give valuable comments on the revision, and then by ensuring that these are adopted, thereby contributing to their not only to their bottom line but to their stakeholders. So with that, I will close this vote of thanks. Once again, thank you to the panelists and the resource personnel for a very insightful session. Thank you very much. And I'll hand you back to Dilani.
Thank you, Mr. Manil Singh. That brings us to the end of today's event. I thank you all for your wonderful participation. Stay in touch with SAFA and CMA for more and more interactive webinar sessions conducted online with the post-COVID-19 new normal and CMA with its 20th anniversary celebrations. Stay safe and have a blessed night. Goodbye.
Thanks all for your participation, and we look forward to your contribution in the future, especially our speakers, Liz, Lakmika and Graham. I think you played a very important role, and I think Manil, that was a very, very excellent vote of thanks and contribution that you made, and also telling about Sri Lanka, how we have maybe gone ahead on IR. So I'm sure all of you are pleased with that. And we had great participation from Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, and India. And we must thank all of them for their major contribution and the questions that they raised. Thank you very much.